how are we back to where we were, looking for fighter aircraft again? One argument could be that, hey, look, we were supposed to buy 126, but we bought only 36, which means we didn't get 90 more aircraft. So that requirement is still out there. Now, this fresh contest that the government has just signaled is for 114 aircraft. So why is Shiv Aroor making a big deal out of this? It's 90 का requirement अभी भी outstanding है. We've said now we need to buy 114 more. So that's just about 24 more than the outstanding requirement right now. But the point here is, does it require another competition? There's nobody to blame but the Indian government and the Indian Air Force. All the other aircraft have been rejected in the earlier contest. The F-21, the F-18, the Typhoon, the Gripen, the MiG-35, these 5 aircraft have already been rejected in that earlier competition. So my question is, why are they back in the reckoning? That the guiding principle should be to get the best aircraft for the Indian Air Force at the best price in the best possible time. That should be the guiding principle. Not log kya kahenge, padhosi kya kahenge, Bangladesh kya kahenge, Pakistan kya kahenge, US kya kahenge. I mean, bullshit.
Hello and welcome to the 45th episode of NR Defense. We are back after a quick Diwali break that we took last week, so we didn't have an episode out in case our listeners and viewers were wondering. And I think they often wonder actually, because one of the comments on the previous episode on the India-China standoff, the border agreement kind of stood out. One of the first comments on that episode was that, why have you guys swapped places? Because in the previous episode, I was sitting where you are sitting right now and you were sitting in my seat.
And look, we're back to our old places now.
And somebody on YouTube commented that, why do you guys swap places? It's kind of, working up my OCD. So we're back to our normal seats.
We love all our viewers and how closely they watch us.
Exactly, yeah. Definitely. We're back after the Diwali break. A hectic week for both of us with US elections and Trump coming back to power and back into the White House. I'm pretty sure that will give us a lot of material to cover in the world of military and defense as we go forward. So we'll wait for that. This week we'll talk about a topic that we've discussed several times on this season of In Our Defense, the Indian Air Force's fighter jet requirements, and the deal for the multi-role fighter aircraft that Shiv just absolutely loves to pan at times, and even I don't get the logic behind it. But just sort of a brief background for our listeners and viewers. Last week there were some reports that the government is almost on the verge of floating a new tender for 114 multi-role fighter aircraft. This would invite competition from around 5 to 6 fighter planes from across the world, including Russian, European, and of course American. I've seen the list. You did a show, I think, last week, perhaps, on the contenders. So we'll get into the specifics, obviously, in a bit. But first, I want to focus just on the need for this so-called competition in the first place, because again, some background for our listeners and viewers. India has already done a competition like this a few years ago, many years ago actually. That was the MMRCA competition, the
medium multi-role combat
aircraft. Yeah. And the Rafale fighter jet from Dassault in France had won that competition. People remember the Rafale as a controversial deal, but people forget that the competition itself wasn't controversial. I think at the end of it boiled down to the French Rafale and the Typhoon, if I'm not wrong, European Typhoon. And the Indian Air Force was, I think they had 2 planes they were very happy with, and the government finally took a call on the Rafale fighter jet. No problems with that, because you had a transition of governments as well when this whole competition was happening. So it was the UPA government under which the competition kind of started, and then the NDA government was the one that finalized on the Rafale. The controversy came much later when the deal for the larger MMRCA contract, which was for many more aircraft with 18 to be bought off shelf and several other hundred or odd more to be manufactured
126
in India. 126 total, yes. Don't want to get into the controversy. However, there was a controversy. Yes, there were allegations that there was some corruption, etc., etc., etc. There was a whole election fought on where this was an issue. The issue kind of fell flat. Why am I talking about all of this is because, and why am I emphasizing that there was no controversy in the MMRCA competition is because it beats me. Why do you need a competition again then? You had a competition. It was fair. It was straightforward. There were no questions asked about it. You had a winner. You had two winners, let's say, and you had a government choosing one aircraft. There was no controversy about that. It was all out there. It was all transparent. And you have that aircraft in service. Now you are again calling all these vendors across the globe to come and bid for around 114 aircraft, hold another set of competition, and run the risk of having yet another fighter jet, even when you already have the Rafale in service. Briefly, before we go into the specifics of what will happen with this deal, etc., etc., why are we doing this? Is it because is it because India's defense procurement process is so red tapish that the government cannot just avoid this whole having to follow these rules and regulations and going down this hole again?
So let's first set the context, because we have to assume as responsible podcasters that not everyone will be familiar with the context. So let's first set the context of what exactly this deal is, why we're here, and then exactly what you're saying. Why the hell are we back in the same place that we were in 12, 15 years ago? Which goes to the heart of this particular episode, Dev. Now the need for it is very clear. The Indian Air Force is very, very short of fighters. If you look at its sanction strength, the Indian Air Force's sanction strength, and this is a data nugget that you will see used ad nauseum, and for good reason. It's an official number. The official number of fighter aircraft squadrons that the Indian Air Force is supposed to operate optimally is 42. It's currently hovering somewhere around the 30 to 32 mark. And that number is going to go down very quickly, because you're going to draw down many other squadrons. You've got the MiG-21s that will be disappearing soon. A few others will have to be upgraded, so they'll be out of action. So your numbers are in decline at this point of time. You had inducted 36 Rafales, which have, which were just two squadrons. And basically you've got a real numbers problem. Now, the Indian Air Force had foreseen this numbers problem quite a way back. The competition that you mentioned, which began way back in 2005, 2006, which was called the Medium Multi-Role Combat Aircraft. It was called the mother of all deals because it was the world's biggest biggest quest to acquire fighter aircraft. 126 fighters made it India's largest potential defense contract, and one of the biggest single acquisitions of fighter aircraft ever in the world. If you look outside the United States, Dave, we will have to go into the controversy surrounding the Rafale, the Rafale deal, because the reason why we are here where we are right now is actually shamefully because of that.
Yes.
And we will get into that, and I'm going to have some choice things to say about that in a moment. But let's just say that the Indian Air Force and the system, it's hard to blame the system, but here are the facts. The Indian Air Force and the Indian government spent more than a decade, untold crores of public money, figuring out what aircraft to buy in order to meet a requirement of 126 fighter aircraft. Like you rightly said, the selection process was not controversial. And finally, under the previous government, the UPA government, I think it was in 2012, that the Rafale was finally selected as the winner of this competition, where 6 aircraft from different parts of the world competed. It was a spectacular, very, very high-profile contest, with millions of dollars spent in publicity and PR by all of these companies. And finally, the Rafale won. It was supposed to be 126 Rafales, but for reasons of finance and various other reasons, change of government, etc., that deal didn't go through. And in order to meet the Indian Air Force's immediate requirements, because numbers were falling, the Modi government, signed a deal with the French to acquire 2 squadrons, not 126, but 36, which means 90 short of what the original number required was supposed to be. Which led to a controversy in 2019 with the Congress and the Rahul Gandhi making the an alleged Rafale scam a huge issue, which was frankly quite brainless, because it was a government to government deal. There were allegations of favoritism and cronyism, which have been investigated at various points. But it's quite telling that even the Congress party, which was so sure that it wanted to mount an entire election campaign on that one issue, has abandoned the issue now. If it felt so strongly that there was a scam, how come it has completely walked away from it? That tells me that it was only political, and it was mounted and constructed in order to create controversy and some kind of heat on the Modi government. Because if it was not, then Rahul Gandhi and the Congress party, which otherwise is quite dogged on issues, and rightfully so, should have held on to this issue if it was so sure that there was a scam, which there wasn't. But the surprising reason now, and now I come to answering your question, Dev, is how are we back to where we were, looking for fighter aircraft again? One argument could be that, hey, look, we were supposed to buy 126, but we bought only 36, which means we didn't get 90 more aircraft. So that requirement is still out there. Now, this fresh contest that the government has just signaled is for 114 aircraft. So why is Shiv Aroor making a big deal out of this? It's 90 का requirement abhi bhi outstanding hai. We've said now we need to buy 114 more. So that's just about 24 more than the outstanding requirement right now. So it's good that India is going in for another contest. Well, yes, we do require those aircraft, but the point here is, does it require another competition? Does it require another global contest where the Indian government and the Indian Air Force will have to get into an entirely extended comparison and field evaluation of all these aircraft? And the sad reality is that there's nobody to blame but the Indian government and the Indian Air Force. Because at the end of the day, not so much the Indian Air Force. I mean, the Indian Air Force doesn't really have a say in these things. But the government, for various reasons, has been pushed on the back foot by this political heat over the alleged Rafale scam. And even now, the Defense Secretary, who had briefed reporters just before his retirement, and spoke about this, the fact that the Indian government was now going to push ahead with this MRFA contest, and it was going to be a global tender in order to be non-controversial. Let me explain what that is, because it is perplexing and infuriating. It basically means that the government is acknowledging that the Rafale scam heat of 2019 did affect it, which is actually a weird paradox, and I'll explain a little later. Because here the government is saying that, yes, the Congress government chose the Rafale, we bought the Rafale. It makes eminent sense now that after having spent millions and billions on the Rafale and acquired 2 squadrons of those, and we've spent billions on India-specific requirements on the Rafales to suit the Indian Air Forces and the Indian Air Force's unique needs. Now we're going to say, instead of capitalizing on all the energy that we spent in, first of all, choosing the Rafale and then customizing it for India, we're now going to open up that contest once again and pit the Rafale against all these aircraft. Now, I personally don't even stand in front of the Rafale and say this is the best fighter. I don't, because I'm not a professional, I'm not a pilot. There were professionals who stood and dealt with the Rafale compared to all those aircraft under the previous government and chose the Rafale. And the 2 governments agreed that the Rafale was the best.
Yes.
And the Rafale was chosen and the Rafale was contracted. But to now say that now we're going to see if there are other aircraft as well that will suit us better is to basically say that the Modi government is acknowledging that despite that issue being completely discredited and rejected by the electorate in 2019 and humiliating the Congress party in the election at that time, the government is now saying, yes, but we don't want to get into that kind of controversy again. It shows that it is thin-skinned. It shows that it is being overcautious when it comes to insulating defense and military hardware procurement from the whimsical nature of the political tutu meme and conversation. And it shows that once again, India and the Indian Air Force are going to be doomed to not be able to forward plan. Once again, it will be a piecemeal acquisition of 114 aircraft, if at all it ever goes through. And once again, we won't have any long-term vision in terms of how many aircraft to buy. Let me just end this answer by saying that an optimal scenario in this case, Dev, would have been an optimal scenario. And this is not me saying it. These are experts across the board saying it. A country that has spent so much money and energy in choosing an aircraft in a hard-fought, fair, transparent competition that has been through the ringer politically as well, through India's mad election cycle and everything else. Why is the priority not on the Indian Air Force's requirements? Why is it about we want to avoid controversy? We want to avoid political heat. We want to make it a non-controversial acquisition. For God's sake, you've done the competition. You've done the competition. What is the compulsion to conduct another competition?
Yep.
You know, there may be political pressure from the United States, and we've got a big man who's just won the United States now, and that pressure is going to definitely have a bearing on what happens now. But I'm just saying, it's a bad reason to open up a contest once again. That's all.
Yeah, I completely get your point, and I agree with you. And this is the part that also perplexed me a lot because, apart from what you said about the defense secretary saying that, there was also a report, if I'm not wrong, in the Hindu that focused on how this new deal, one of the primary objectives of it would be to ensure transparency. And I was like, no, the primary objective of it should be to get you an aircraft and not ensure transparency. But that tells you that this whole thing is kind of perhaps coming from that fear that, if there's one more controversy over, us buying aircraft, it might, lead to something. And this also kind of brings to memory the whole fiasco with the Bofors guns and the Kargil war, when you had imposed an embargo on the company because of the allegations of corruption with the deal. And when the Kargil war happened, suddenly you had no ammunition for those guns because the manufacturer could not supply that ammunition to you. Before we come to what fighter jets will be involved in this competition and where does the Rafale stand when compared to them, I want to first talk just about the competition, because we can rant, but we have to accept it is going to happen. The government is not like listening to our podcast week after week and taking decisions based on that. They have their own realities they need to address. So the competition is going to happen like it did, like you said, 10, 12, 15 years ago. What happens in this competition? How does it happen on the ground? Think of it like buying a car, right? You how do you decide the model? How do you decide the accessories? How do you decide the kind of engine you want? I mean, engine I'm pretty sure comes stock with all these jets, but I'm pretty sure you can make some modifications here and there. Do you ask that question that most car owners in India बोल के कितना देती है, for example, and stuff like that? So what's the experience of pitting 6 top end fighter jets against each other and arriving at a result? Okay, this is the one that we want. How do you go about doing that?
So, a contest and a field evaluation and a paper evaluation is a long process. The process of choosing a fighter aircraft is an extremely, intricate, painstaking, detailed and meticulous process that involves both, on-site work where you actually have pilots flying the aircraft and testing them across a variety of criteria, and then you've got paper tests, which is where you're comparing prices, maintenance criteria, and things like that. And these things tend to take years. The process of selection for the MMRCA deal was considered so good and so sharp and so bulletproof that the Air Chief at that time, Air Chief Marshal Pradeep Vasant Nayak, in a press conference, had actually gone out. Imagine the irony. He actually went out to say that we are planning to patent this process.
Wow.
He couldn't have known at that time that the entire deal was going to collapse and become the subject of this huge mountain of allegations and counter allegations between two administrations. But he felt very strongly that this was the case. Now, since you brought in the analogy of cars, which is a very good analogy in this case, let me construct it on cars to illustrate precisely where we are at right now. Let's assume, Dev, you wanted to buy a car back in 2007, and you had to select between, hypothetical, you had to select between a Mahindra Thar, a Tata Harrier, and whatever, a Grand Vitara, whatever, 3 mid-sized SUVs. And at that time, you bought you bought the Grand Vitara and you were okay with it. I mean, it was the more expensive of the lot or whatever, but you were okay with it and you bought it. And we're not talking about numbers here. Just work with me on this. Now, 10 years later, you've loved the Grand Vitara and you're okay with it, and you spent a lot of time thinking about it, and you fought with your family and you bought it, and your family's given you grief in the meanwhile about buying the car, but you still love it very much and it suits your needs, and it's paid off in the end. And 10 years later, you need to buy another car, and you're really dead set that the Grand Vitara is the way to go because you're used to it. You love what it does for you, and and a sort of improved version of the Grand Vitara has come along, and you just want to go with that. But now your family says, look, you better choose once again among all these cars because ये market में नया Hyosung SUV भी आया है, and there's a new Pajero also that's come in. And there are a couple of other things also that have come in from the outside. There's this new Chevrolet SUV and all these things. So you better reboot your selection process. Now, this is even as I give you this metaphor, it seems so inadequate because because what I've illustrated right now actually seems quite reasonable.
Yeah, actually,
because at the end of the day, what you invest in buying a vehicle is not going to compel you in terms of your decision of what you're going to buy later. But compare it with a fighter aircraft, which is A, billions of dollars of not your own money, it's public money, A. B, you're not making huge lifestyle changes when you buy a car vis-a-vis if you buy a new car later. You're still driving a damn car. A fighter aircraft is completely different. It is an enormous amount of investment in infrastructure to support that particular kind of fighter aircraft. It's not a fighter aircraft are not plug and play. Like a Rafale's infrastructure is very different from an F-15's infrastructure, is very different from a Typhoon's infrastructure. There are some commonalities, but owing to intellectual property, etc., they're very, very different, and you have to invest all over again when you choose a new fighter aircraft, which is why commonality and economy of type and numbers is a huge priority in the Air Force. The Air Force has not enjoyed that thing, which we've spoken about many times in the past. So a field evaluation is an extremely expensive, time-taking, and remember, time is of the essence here. The Air Force needs these aircraft not far into the future. It needs them like quickly, maybe at the end of this decade or the next, or early the next decade. So it doesn't have the time. So my concern now is the government has signaled a fresh competition. But even as we bash the government for bringing India back to this deja vu point, which all of us feel like we were there just 10 years ago. Why are we back at this point? It means that forward planning has not worked. One has to also wonder, in their defense, and I'm being very fair here, that there are two reasons why the government may actually be saying we need to go in for a global kind of contest. A, there are some concerns that the Rafale, in terms of delivery time, there may be some issues as far as delivery time is concerned. Now, I have mixed feelings about this reality, because if India is going to be the largest operator of the Rafale in the world, surely it has some muscle to force faster deliveries. So I think this narrative that Rafale, time pe nahi aayega is a bit of a red herring in my book. But that may be one of the compelling factors in this whole thing. B, you've got the Americans. You can never ignore American pressure in this entire enterprise. Okay, and we'll talk about Trump in a bit as well. This particular contest, and I think it's time we name all the contestants in this, because that'll paint a picture for our viewers of who all are competing in this. There are 3 American fighters in the fray. There's the F-21, which is basically a dressed up F-16. There's the F-18 Super Hornet, which is a naval fighter which lost the contest for the Indian Navy. And there is a new entrant called the F-15 Eagle II. So there are 3 aircraft from the United States competing. There are 2 aircraft from Russia competing. One is the MiG-35, which is a dressed up MiG-29. And then you've got the Su-35, which is a super dressed up Su-30, which we have in huge numbers. Then you've got the Gripen, which is a fighter from Sweden. And then you have the Eurofighter Typhoon from Europe. 8 aircraft in all competing for a deal for 114 fighter aircraft. Now, essentially, essentially, Dev, this contest should have been, and I'm saying in a perfect world, this contest should have been a toss-up between, and most people actually saw it as a direct face-off between the Rafale, which you've already bought and inducted, and the F-15, which is like a new entrant into the contest, which has very many compelling reasons to pay it attention because it's a new evolution of the legacy F-15, and it's an F-15 that the US Air Force itself is buying. The US Air Force is buying it. The Qatari Air Force is buying it. There are many other, customers across the world who may be choosing it. And therefore, people thought, okay, you've got the Rafale and you've got the F-15, which makes political sense because of the India-US relationship. And therefore, this should be a toss-up between the two. All of the other aircraft in this competition, barring the... I'm not going to talk about the Russians because India is very clear that it doesn't want to buy Russian aircraft in this competition, even though they are being considered. All the other aircraft have been rejected in the earlier contest. The F-21, the F-18, the Typhoon, the Gripen, the MiG-35, these 5 aircraft have already been rejected in that earlier competition. So my question is, why are they back in the reckoning? Now, we don't know what shape this contest is going to take. We don't know yet if 4 aircraft will be considered or 3 aircraft. I'm just going by what the media reports say, that it's going to be a global contest. So I'm assuming that all 8 aircraft that I just named, which responded to the request for information some years ago, are going to potentially be contenders in this entire deal. Because if that happens, it means India is going back to doing work that it has already done. It has already spent a lot of money doing, which is evaluating, fairly testing, field evaluations, everything, rejected those aircraft in the past, but is now saying, okay, we'll consider again as part of a global contest. And I just don't get that.
Yeah. Right. We'll talk just a bit more on how does the Rafale stand when this contest happens in the upcoming few years. But after a quick break.
Good morning, the pineapple looking very good, very nice. It's my favorite. लड़के are not interested. Vanity is not for them. ये दुनिया का सबसे बड़ा झूठ है क्योंकि हर दूसरा बंदा दिल्ली में सेम हेयरकट करा के घूम रहा है. अगर विराट कोहली कोई अच्छा नया ट्रेंडिंग हेयर स्टाइल करा रहे, सारे लड़के उसी दिन भागते हैं सैलून में. क्योंकि लड़के तो रिन से मुंह धो लेते हैं, बोलते हैं ना.
Exactly.
मुझे नहीं धोना रिन से मुंह यार. I like vanity. I want to look good. I enjoy fashion वगैरह वगैरह. कभी बोला नहीं, कभी मुझे ऑनेस्टली लगता नहीं था कि मैं फनी हूँ. मुझे कभी बड़े होते हुए कभी किसी ने बोला नहीं दे, हे यू आर सो फनी, बिकॉज आई डिडंट रियली हैव फ्रेंड्स ग्रोइंग अप एंड ऑल दैट. कॉलेज के टाइम पे जब मेरे प्रॉपर दोस्त बने, दे टोल्ड मी कि यार you have a great sense of humor.
How would you describe your personal fashion sense?
My personal
Has
fashion
it also
sense
evolved like your beauty?
massively. In fact, मुझे beauty शुरू करने के टाइम पे भी नहीं पता था that I'm into fashion. I come from a very middle class family where we didn't like, हमने कभी branded कपड़े नहीं पहने. मेरे कपड़े मम्मी ले आती थी तो मैं पहन लेता था. काफी सारे hand me downs होते थे भाई बहनों के. तो ऐसा कभी था नहीं कि वो प्रिविलेज नहीं थी कि आप सोचो कि वो लाइक दिस इज हाउ आई वांट टू ड्रेस अप और मुझे ये ब्रांड के कपड़े पहनने हैं. नाउ दैट आई हैव दोस रिसोर्सेज वेयर आई गो टू इवेंट्स एंड डिजाइनर्स आर लाइक, अच्छा लेट्स गिव हिम क्लोथ्स एंड ही विल वेयर देम, हमारी भी पब्लिसिटी होगी, ही विल आल्सो लुक गुड. बट आई हैव रियलाइज्ड यार कि मतलब मेरा भी ओपिनियन है कपड़ों में. आई केयर अबाउट हाउ आई लुक.
Welcome back. Shiv and I are discussing what an upcoming competition that will be held for the Indian Air Force to buy 114 multi-role fighter aircraft would look like. That's what we've been talking about before the break. I wanted to understand. So, I actually had noted it down that I was going to ask you, how real is this deal really? Like, or sorry, the contest is really, or is it just to follow those rules and regulations, just to, ensure there's no controversy, and at the back of your mind, you already have decided that, bhai, we have Rafale 36, we've got 26 more coming for the Navy. Different types, sort of, but basic same sort of model. So you have similar spare parts, you have your technicians trained on it, you have your pilots already trained on it, like you said before the break, the whole infrastructure to support this aircraft is already there with you within the country. So buying more of them just makes logical sense. But you made a very interesting point before the break, that there is one new entrant. If you forget the other 4 or 5 that are also being talked about in the media, we don't know that officially because the government of India has not said anything. It could very well be that the government of India will be like, okay, we just have one more new option, we want to try that out and see how that shapes up against the Rafale. The F-15, like you said, American, very important, and Trump is back in power, also very important. He wants to create jobs there, he wants to give local businesses over there a boost, etc. That will play a role. So then I want to ask you, how do you see, where do you see, what do you see happening in this competition? I don't mean what you talked about before, the field trials and stuff like that, the paper audits, etc. Realistically speaking, how do you see it panning out? How seriously is the Air Force going to be considering the other aircraft, the F-15 included? And very interestingly, I randomly found out Lockheed Martin, which makes the F-21, has a dedicated web page saying F-21 for something. It says for India, from India. It
Yeah.
has a full web page. Shiv. I was surprised.
Yeah.
I was like, the MRFA tender is not out yet, but this company already has a full web page explaining how this will benefit the Indian Air Force. It has said this F-21 has been customized already for the Indian Air Force, and it is so perfect for that web page is a must read. We'll have a link in the show notes for our listeners and viewers. And it's like, full on advertisement of that typical US, way of, trying to pitch something and sell something. I was quite caught about it. It's like, okay, they are taking this very, very seriously. And that's what made me think that, okay, there will be a lot of pressures over here. There will be the governments getting involved. There will be the companies trying to pitch and, pressure the Air Force and the Indian government in different ways. So how do you see that aspect playing out over the next few years?
The website is the least surprising aspect of it, because I can tell you that for the last 15 years, companies like Lockheed Martin, Boeing, Airbus, and others have mounted huge media campaigns for their particular aircraft. Now, you've seen me strap into some of these fighters, including the F-16, the F-18, the Rafale, and others. Those were all part of these media campaigns.
Right.
I will freely admit it. I'm not a pilot. Journalists are not pilots. But when these companies approached some of us and said, you don't want to fly and you can write about it, and I said, but as long as I have the freedom to write whatever I want and report fairly on these aircraft, they said, yeah, of course, sure. I have flown these aircraft. So in terms of money, these companies, Lockheed Martin, Boeing, which are the richest aerospace defense companies in the world, were given virtually blank checks in order to win this deal, because this deal was simply too eye-watering to ignore. The potential revenues and profits from winning such a huge deal from India means that having an outsized media and publicity budget is a tiny little price to pay. It's nothing at all. These companies have revenues in tens of hundreds of billions. So let's make no mistake, a website is a blink, less than a blink of an eye for a Lockheed Martin. Having said that, the shape of this contest going forward is something that I'm a little intrigued about, Dave, because I feel that the report suggesting this global contest may possibly be a little bit of kite flying by the government. Okay. The government may be trying to test the market to see what the responses are from the market, because it already has 8 interested parties wanting to compete in this deal, and now suggesting that there's going to be a global contest and not a limited kind of contest, kind of opens the field and will give the government a chance to test mood. This podcast will definitely be something they will hear. I did a show about this last week as well, where the MRFA was roundly bashed by experts, including an Air Force veteran. And it will, I think this is a feedback-taking exercise, including from the political landscape about, what they see about this. We told you we wanted to do a non-controversial thing, etc., etc. Even though I am a deep pessimist, I'm a person who always prepares and expects the worst case scenario in all situations. I find myself being a little optimistic about this. I find this situation so completely outlandishly absurd and bizarre. My good friend Angad Singh, the well-known aviation writer, called it madness, and I agree with him in totality on this. I find it unthinkable that the government is going to go in for another global contest. I don't think that's going to happen. Frankly, because it's too complicated. It's simply unsustainable, and it will make us look like it will make us look like global fools. Okay, and aviation experts across the world are chuckling at India right now. They chuckle at India a lot. Not that we should care about what they think, but they are chuckling at India, saying, "Hello, you just spent like a decade and a half choosing an aircraft. What are you doing trying to choose again now? So I think the shape of the competition will be optimized going forward. I don't see it becoming a big issue. But there are new pressure points.
Yes.
America is a big pressure point. Trump is a king size pressure point now. Many people forget that even though the drone deal that India and the US just signed, even though it had its genesis under an Obama administration, it was Trump. It was Trump
Yes,
as president
yes.
in his first tenure who actually pushed the drone deal in a very big way and cleared those deals being armed drones. Fun fact, the Obama administration had, in fact, denied India armed drones, armed predator drones. It was the Trump administration in 2017, if I'm not mistaken, that said, no, India is a strategic ally. We need India. And they want armed drones, so we will convert this requirement into armed drones and we'll comply with what India has to say.
Wow.
And that deal has just been signed a few weeks before he's become
Yes.
president again. It's incredible. And if anyone needs to take ownership of that particular deal having finally reached finality, it's him. The Biden administration has ensured that there is a great deal of strategic continuity in terms of defense and others. The relationship has largely been untouched, but for a few little disputes over some Khalistani jokers and things, but that's beyond this podcast. The fact is that the defense relationship between India and the US has only been growing. And every defense procurement, like we've said so many times on this podcast, is an opportunity to sweeten a defense relationship. Now, does India, with a Trump administration, want to signal that with this fighter aircraft deal, we're willing to look at a United States aircraft more than anything else? We're willing to, take the damage of, stepping out of a zone of, a sensible decision and going with the aircraft that we've already bought and considering an American aircraft because this is going to be a huge industrial push. Remember, very, very important thing to remember here, Dave, that I forgot to mention earlier is the Rafale is not made in India.
Yep.
Okay. If the Rafale was currently made in India, we bought all those 36 Rafales that the Indian Air Force were bought off the shelf from France. If the Rafale had a production line in India already, which was the original plan, this would have been a non-conversation and we probably wouldn't have been doing this episode. Then the case would have been like a nightmare case. There was no question. Nobody would have even considered buying another aircraft because we have a production line of fighter aircraft here in the country churning out Rafales. Why would we even think of buying anything else? Let's improve the Rafale right here on Indian soil. But the Rafale is not made here and there could be delivery delays. And this particular MRFA contest is not just to boost squadron numbers, not just to buy aircraft from abroad, but to create a huge industrial fighter aircraft manufacturing base here in India that is not part of HAL, not part of Hindustan Aeronautics Limited's ecosystem. It's going to be in the private sector like the C295 Tata Airbus facility. So in that respect, I'm wondering whether the Americans have an edge. Because the Americans, and you started this question with the Lockheed Martin website, the Americans have thrown everything at this contest. They've thrown everything at this contest. You had the United States pushing the F-16 and the F-18 in. Then the F-16 was rejected. Then Lockheed Martin decided, isko F-21 bana dete hain because the F-16 word is like because Pakistan has it. So let's rebrand it F-21 and add a few bells and whistles to it and say these are India-specific things. I'm trivializing it. These are the important improvements. There's no doubt about it. But ultimately, it was a cosmetic kind of makeover, and they called it the F-21. It became a bit of a global joke as well. But ultimately, it's an F-16 with a lot of bells and whistles, and they rebranded it the F-21 in order to, survive the PR kind of onslaught that it was facing globally. F-18 also aa gaya. F-18 has a impression of being a naval fighter. It has lost a competition with against the Rafale for the naval deal. And therefore, the United States has been very agile in this whole thing. They've said, okay, we've seen that the F-21 didn't work. We've seen that the F-18 is not really working. let's put in the F-15. Now, in my view, the F-15 is probably the strongest contender.
Okay.
If you don't look at the Rafale, and disclaimer, I love the F-15. I personally love the F-15. I'm not a pilot. I don't have the technical skills to talk about which aircraft is better than the other. But the F-15 has much going for it because Boeing and the United States government are investing in the F-15 right now. They've just built this incredibly advanced version of what has been a beloved Cold War era fighter and made it very, very modern and capable for the modern battlefield. The United States Air Force is buying these fighters, which is the biggest thing that any customer could want, saying that if it's such a great aircraft, why are you not buying it? That kind of thing. The F-15 is being bought in large numbers by the United States Air Force because it has had problems with the F-35, the delays in the coming in of other aircraft, etc. Therefore, what should ideally be a 2-horse race is now potentially an 8-horse race for the Indian Air Force requirement. I don't quite know what shape it's going to take. I hope it will be a short, brief kind of exercise. But I don't see how the Indian Air Force and the government can sidestep certain compulsions, like having field evaluation trials of new entrants.
Yep.
The F-15 Eagle 2 and the Su-35 from Russia are new entrants. So if the government decides it wants to consider them because it wants to be non-controversial, then it will have to consider them on the field as well. So I think we have some pain ahead, but I'm still optimistic it's not going to be, 8-horse pain. Let's wait and see how that plays out.
Yeah, right. But then this is a point I think also we can perhaps do a separate episode on altogether. Is that the prospect of having an American fighter jet in your inventory? That's going to make the problem of having too many fighter jet models even worse, because even though you already have many models, you've had mostly from the same countries. You already had French aircraft before, for example. You had many Russian aircraft, even if they're different models. And when it comes to aircraft from one single country, they kind of tend to share some commonalities, which kind of helps you optimize the inventory and optimize the logistics of it, etc. But this would be a first for the Indian Air Force to operate and maintain an American fighter jet. That would come with a huge cost, like you said. But I think that's something we can go into a little later once we know better about this MRFA, the contest and deal. Right. Final thought, because we need to keep this short today. We are kind of constrained with time. Final thought, and this is the one that is for me really important, is really how old is the Indian Air Force? Because the whole reason we are having this contest, the whole reason we are having this podcast talking about this in such detail is because of this constant complaint that, squadron strengths are falling. This legendary number of 42. I don't know when that number first came into existence, that is the sanctioned strength of the Indian Air Force. It sort of paints a picture as though the Air Force is flying like duct-taped planes in the air. It's not. I know that, right? So many years of reading about defense. I know that. You've had many mid-life upgrades were performed to many of these planes. The MiG-21 Bison, for example, you've talked about in one of our previous episodes, is like quite modern after the many upgrades that have happened to it. But it doesn't help that when you look at images of Indian Air Force fighter jets, they actually do look old, by the way. The body does not have that sheen. It's a very weird way to talk about it, because the abilities of a fighter jet obviously are in the engine and in the missiles and its capabilities. But when you look at it, it does look old. But anyway, that aside, really how old is the Indian Air Force and what are we lacking? That we really need to buy something new from, and our current fleet is just not good enough to help in our whatever the missions.
No, let's be very clear. The Indian Air Force has a good fleet. It has a reasonably good fleet. It has a mix of some stuff which deserves to be retired soon, which it will be, like the MiG-21s. And the Indian Air Force, let's make no mistake about a couple of things. The Indian Air Force is a highly professional force. They've got some of the best combat pilots in the world. They've got war experience. All of those things, all those boxes are ticked. Where the Indian Air Force has suffered is that it hasn't always had alignment from successive governments over the decades, in terms of being able to conduct long-term planning. Whether it is an indigenous aircraft, whether it is procurement from abroad, it has always been saddled by governments that are compelled by political decisions or compulsions of bilateral relations, things like that. We've spoken extensively about the Su-30 deal with Russia, which was basically incredibly, a favor to Boris Yeltsin. The Indian Air Force wasn't even keen on the fighter at that point of time. And now we're the world's largest operator of that fighter, and it is the aircraft that we have in largest numbers. A greater aviation paradox and irony doesn't exist in the world at this point of time. The Indian Air Force is pegged on that number 42 because that is a number that was evolved. I'm not sure exactly when, but it's not a new number. That sanctioned strength number has been on for decades, and this is an Air Force which is 3/4 of a century old, right? And it knows what it's doing. It has fought wars. It is capable of long-term planning. But the Indian systems, and it's not one government's fault. It's the Indian systems' predilection with piecemeal procurement, an almost obsessive allergy to long-term planning, and the kind of thin skin that we've seen from the defense secretary saying we want to do a non-controversial, procurement. I don't understand what non-controversial is. If it follows the rules, if it does not involve corruption, and if it does not violate any procurement rules, then where does the question of controversy come into it, right? I'm a little annoyed and irritated by the fact that the defense secretary would use the word a non-controversial rule. I mean, what is he saying? Is he saying that it should not bother people on Twitter? Or it should not raise the hackles of people on Instagram? Or that people in think tanks in the United States shouldn't be able to poke at it? What the hell is he talking about? We are a professional country, not a banana republic. We are not some Caribbean nation, being forced to buy aircraft from somewhere. And therefore, I think that the Indian Air Force should also be quite annoyed with this. Because the Indian Air Force, obviously doesn't have the freedom to speak its mind on such matters. But the Indian Air Force will probably think, if I had to draw a speech bubble over their heads right now, they're probably saying, what the hell? You made us work for 15 years to choose an aircraft. We were there with you. We aligned ourselves. Most of our budget is going to go into this. We have a warlike situation, and now you're talking about another contest. So I think there are cultural problems as far as defense procurement in India is concerned. There is, like you said, an enormous amount of red tapeism. Even though I have to credit the Modi government with having removed much of that, there is a much greater degree of decisional clarity. But there still appears to be a kind of reluctance and a hesitation, to bell the cat when it comes to difficult decisions. Manohar Parrikar, the late former defense minister, was someone who attempted to bring that kind of brash, fearless clarity into the system in defense. And, bless his soul, one misses him in the defense ministry because he's the kind of guy who said, so what if it's controversial? Single vendor situation हो तो क्या हुआ? अगर ये transparent है, अगर ये guideline follow कर रहा है ये deal, तो इसमें क्या है? So who cares what anybody else thinks? As long as it's defensible on paper, as long as a deal is defensible in court, why should we care about single vendor situation? Is like one huge bogey that everyone talks about. Oh my God, how can you have a single vendor situation? It should be a competition. Many more people should come. But if a single vendor situation suits your needs, then why need to go in for a contest is what Manohar Parrikar did when he signed off on the Tata Airbus deal, which is now being built in Vadodara for the C295. Otherwise, that deal would have drifted for decades and the Indian Air Force wouldn't have got the aircraft it wanted. Unfortunately, he was snatched away. He's no longer there. But the kind of movement he started within the bureaucracy, within the political system of being fearless if you've got nothing to fear, has crept back with this bullshit, non-controversial procurement rubbish that's being peddled by the recently retired defense secretary. And I don't mean to be disrespectful because bureaucrats work very hard to reach where they are, I'm sure. But I think all of us, the Air Force, the system has reason to be extremely annoyed that someone that senior would even suggest that the guiding principle for a procurement is, oh, we want it to be non-controversial. Not that, like you rightly said, Dave, in the first question, that the guiding principle should be to get the best aircraft for the Indian Air Force at the best price in the best possible time. That should be the guiding principle. Not log kya kahenge, padosi kya kahenge, Bangladesh kya kahenge, Pakistan kya kahenge, US kya kahenge. I mean, bullshit. And it's a reminder that we're back in that place. And I think that's the scarier part of this entire thing.
Yeah. And I think that's exactly the reason we did this episode, because it would have been completely fine if you had said, or if you had used the logic that, oh, there's a new aircraft from the F-15, it's quite good. It might be just a bit better than the Rafale that we have. So why don't we consider it and see if, kind of adds an edge to the Indian Air Force that
Exactly.
we don't have anymore. Instead of, ki, like you said, non-controversial deal karna hai. So yeah, that's where we are at. And unfortunately, we'll have to cover this topic in the upcoming episodes.
I think we're going to do many more episodes on this.
On this, definitely. As in when we have development. So we'll keep an eye out and we'll keep a watch and we'll keep talking about this because we'll have to do that. Right. Thanks, Shiv. Fun chat. And I was expecting what you said, honestly, because I think, spoke about this briefly on and off camera several times. And I'm really glad we did this episode. And I really hope, even if nothing comes out of it, I really hope people in the right places do listen to this episode, even if they don't want to act on it, but just listen to what we had to discuss on this episode. And thanks as always to our listeners and viewers. And also special thanks to our producer Anna Priyadarshini. That's it for this week's Defense Dose. For more, tune in next week. Till then, stay safe and do not cross any boundaries with your passport. Bye-bye.